reunion of malleable minds. Okay. We all come like this, infinitely curious, always exploring, always learning, and addressing the most difficult tasks of a lifetime with tremendous gusto. Yet, just a few years later, many children are like this, or that, or that. And the question is, why? My work shows that some of the things we're doing to motivate our students are actually turning them off to learning, making them afraid of difficulty, making them dislike effort, making them wilt in the face of obstacles. When we put too much emphasis on being gifted all the time or being talented, who has the talent? When we put too much emphasis on getting the highest test scores or getting into the one right school, we risk creating generations of students who think they have to be infallible. Infallible is the enemy of learning. Infallible is the enemy of talent development. So how do we make sure our students focus on learning? That's what my work is about, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. In my work, we find that students can have different mindsets about their talents and abilities. Some have a fixed mindset. They think their talents and abilities are just fixed traits. You have a certain amount, and that's that. As you'll see, this is the mindset that makes students into non-learners and prevents many, many talented or gifted students from fulfilling their potential. Because being smart is so important that learning takes a back seat. But other students have a growth mindset. They believe that basic talents and abilities can be developed throughout life through assiduous application and good instruction and mentoring. Now, they don't think everyone's the same, that everyone comes with the same talents or abilities, and they don't necessarily think that anyone can become Albert Einstein, but they understand that even Einstein wasn't the guy who he became before he put in many years of dedicated labor. Now, I'm often asked, which mindset is correct? Maybe it's good to have a growth mindset, but which one is right? And what's so exciting in the book Malleable Minds, when you read it, you'll see that the neuroscientists who were at the meeting, John Janitas, Adele Diamond, Eric Pakolak, and the cognitive psychologists, they're actually all also cognitive psychologists, the neuroscientists are showing that the brain is so much more malleable, has so much more plasticity than we ever imagined. It retains the ability to grow and even reorganize over much of our lives. Cognitive psychologists, the three I named, are also isolating the components of intelligence, executive function, all kinds of cognitive skills, and they're figuring out how to teach them. So we really are in a burgeoning era of malleable minds. I think you'll also be interested to know that Alfred Binet, who invented the IQ test, had a radical growth mindset. And isn't that ironic? The test that's been used to say, well, you're smart and you're not, was invented by a man who had no views like that at all. He did not think his test was measuring intelligence. He did not think his test was certainly measuring fixed intelligence. He was extremely disturbed when Americans started using it saying it was useful for that purpose. But he could not stop us. And we hope that the book Malleable Minds is, maybe we should have dedicated it to Alfred Binet, because he was the growth mindset theorist par excellence. Most of his career was devoted to developing curricula that could make kids smarter. How do these mindsets work? They work by creating a whole psychological world for students. And through our research, we have tried to illuminate this psychological world. So why don't you enter with me into those worlds and see what they're like. We did a large study of hundreds of students making the transition to 7th grade. This is a time when a lot of students who had been achieving well before and may have been considered gifted and talented turn off to school. What happens? The grading gets more stringent, the work gets more difficult, the environment becomes less personal, and a lot of students who were used to doing well easily start falling by the wayside. And we wondered, would mindsets play an important role in how students fared across this transition? We measured students' mindsets as they entered 7th grade, seeing whether they believed their intelligence was fixed or something that could be developed. We measured a lot of their attitudes toward learning, and we monitored their grades, especially in math, over the next 2 years. Okay, so the first thing we found was that students who endorsed a fixed mindset said their number one goal in school was to always look smart and never look dumb. Above all, never look dumb. That means they're afraid of challenges. Challenge seeking, taking on difficult tasks, pushing out of your comfort zone. We know now that's the way talent develops. But their goal was essentially never put yourself in a situation where you won't look really smart. But those who endorsed a growth mindset, they cared about doing well, they cared a lot about grades, but they cared even more about learning, taking on hard things, learning, pushing out of their comfort zone, realizing their potential over time. When we looked at their grades over the next 2 years, this is what we found. Although they had entered 7th grade with identical achievement test scores, by the end of their first semester of junior high, their grades jumped apart and continued to diverge over the next 2 years. The only thing that differed were their mindsets and the beliefs and goals that traveled with their mindsets. We then, don't look yet. We then said, who cares more about grades than anyone on the face of the earth? And we decided to study pre-med students at an Ivy League university on the East Coast. These kids were gifted. Their SAT, I don't say that that's the measure, but their SAT scores were extremely, extremely high. They had lived their lives for this moment, the gateway to the pre-med curriculum, the organic chemistry course. Their parents had probably lived their lives for this moment. But still, those with the growth mindset said they cared more about learning than they did about grades. And look what happened. Controlling for everything you can think of, equating the groups. Those who endorsed the growth mindset on the right earned significantly higher final grades than those who endorsed the fixed mindset. How did that happen? It happened because they focused on learning. They studied more deeply. And we learned that if they got some disappointing results on the first exam or two in the course, they did everything in their power to recover. They met with the TA repeatedly. They went to review sessions. They formed study groups. Maybe they found advanced students who had taken the course and done well, who could mentor them. They did everything in their power to learn, to develop their abilities, and it worked. We showed that as a group, those with a growth mindset did recover from initial poor grades. But those with the fixed mindset thought, well, if I'm smart, which I probably am, it should just take me there. But guess what? It often didn't. And when it didn't, they did not have the growth mindset learning strategies in their repertoire. They were disappointed, they were upset, but they didn't do anything differently the next time. As a group, they did not recover from initial poor performance. So you have these two groups of highly gifted students, and one group knows how to develop its potential better than the other. This brings us to the second thing we have found in our research. In a fixed mindset, effort is a bad thing. They believe that if you are gifted, if you have talent, you shouldn't need effort. And if you need to put out a lot of effort to learn something or master it, obviously you're not gifted or talented. As you can imagine, this is something that will really stop people from developing their potential, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But in a growth mindset, students tell us effort is a good thing. It helps them use their ability to the fullest and increase it over time. Students with a fixed mindset agree with the following statement: things come easily. Great discoveries come easily to people who are true geniuses. But people with a growth mindset agree with the following: even geniuses have to work hard for their great discoveries. Who's right? Some of the most exciting work in psychology now by Anders Ericsson and others is suggesting that the key ingredient in talent development is something called deliberate practice. So when you take people who later we call geniuses, or who go to the top of their fields, or who make great creative contributions, there were once other people just as talented as they were, but they were the ones who engaged in deliberate practice. We've heard the 10,000 hours, but it's not 10,000 hours noodling around. It's 10,000 hours pushing out of their comfort zone. It's 10,000 hours addressing weaknesses that might hold them back. And so, again, it's very exciting now that we're learning a key ingredient in talent development is the recognition that learning and effort are the key to realizing one's potential. I believe the fixed mindset belief that if you have ability, you shouldn't need effort is one of the worst beliefs a gifted, talented student or anyone could have. Everything in life that's worthwhile takes tremendous effort. And if effort makes you feel dumb, if you don't believe effort is effective, you're at a severe disadvantage. Since I wrote my book, Mindset, I get letters from countless adults who were once child prodigies. Many of them have never completed college or found meaningful work. They, were these great prodigies. Everyone told them they were geniuses. They never had to work hard when they were younger like the other non-geniuses. And they learned to equate being smart with not working hard, not having to work hard like other people. At some point in their lives, they bumped up against difficulty, and that was it. They decided to retire because pushing out of that comfort zone was so threatening. And what if they pushed out of the comfort zone, worked hard, and still didn't do well? Worst of all, they'd rather have people saying to them for the rest of their lives, "You're so smart, if only you stuck to things." That's why they're not working hard, because they want you to keep on thinking. They're geniuses, they could be prodigies, but they have wasted those talents by not, and we have been responsible for that by not teaching them how to get out of that comfort zone and do hard things. And in fact, I want to say it another way. Having the hard things be the comfort zone, not the easy things. A few years ago, I spoke to the elite athletes in another country, and they told me that not one of them had been number one as a teenager. The number ones coasted on natural talent, and again they thought, I'm talented, I don't have to sweat and practice like the others. But at some point, the others passed them by. And those were the people sitting in the room in front of me. They were number 4 or 8 or 22, and they knew they had to do something if they were going to get to the top. They did it, and now they were the people going to the Olympics and the World Championships. They had developed their talents, and the naturals had squandered their talents. In fact, Bruce Jenner, the great Olympian, one of the greatest Olympians we've ever had, said he might not have been a great Olympian had he not had a learning difficulty. Through that learning difficulty, he understood the power of effort to build abilities. And he had the insight that if he put that effort where he also had this natural talent, the sky would be the limit, and he was right. The third thing we've learned, the third thing that turns mindsets into high or low achievement, is how students react to setbacks. In a fixed mindset, it's eek, it's about me. It's a setback is saying, I'm not good at this. Now notice, in a fixed mindset, everything is about measuring your ability and protecting your ability. And once you start making mistakes or having failures, it's kind of, get me out of here. And what we've found in research is that students in a fixed mindset will hide their mistakes or conceal their deficiencies rather than address them. Mistakes, deficiencies are anxiety producing. They make them feel incompetent. But we now know that mistakes are essential, and persistence in the face of difficulty is essential for talent development. In a growth mindset, students recognize that. A mistake, a setback, it's part of learning. It doesn't tell me who I am at a deep level. It gives me clues about what I need to do more of or what I need to do differently to move forward effectively in the future. So in our research, we see that students in a growth mindset capitalize on their mistakes, confront their deficiencies, and in our studies, they end up accomplishing more than they seemed capable of in the beginning. We actually see talent development going on within our experimental sessions. Okay, don't look at that yet. Going back to our study of 7th graders, making that transition, we asked them what they would do after a disappointing mark on the first test in a new course. And here's what they said. In a fixed mindset, the students said, I'd spend less time on this subject from now on. I would try to cheat on the next test. So think about it. The poor grade means they're not good at it to them. Effort is aversive and ineffective. And so here's what's left for them to desire or to see as a worthy strategy. But in a growth mindset, the student said, I'd work harder in this class from now on. I'd spend more time studying for the tests. In 2011, Moser and his colleagues did a really neat neuroscience study. They measured the evoked potential from parts of the brain that reflect the processing of errors. Students worked on a task, made errors, and they recorded from the parts of the brain that represent the processing of errors. What you see on the right, that red-hot brain, is a growth mindset brain relishing the errors. It's detecting the errors, it's processing them deeply, and it's correcting them. It's learning from them. But that ice-cold brain on the left is a fixed mindset student running from the error, fleeing from it as quickly as possible. You see virtually no processing and correction of the errors. The good news is that in subsequent research, when they taught fixed mindset students a growth mindset, their brains looked just like the ones on the right. So again, talent development requires that we see what we don't know, what we need to learn. We process it deeply, we correct those errors, and we become smarter as a result over time. In many, many studies now, we've shown that a fixed mindset does not give people a way of recovering from setbacks. It's kind of run for the hills, give up, retreat to comfort zone, become defensive, it's someone else's fault, school is boring, that kind of thing. Whenever I hear a student say school is boring, I think, fixed mindset. Maybe it is a little boring, but if you weren't so defensive, you'd find something interesting. Become defensive, try to feel superior to other kids in some way or other. So we've talked about how the mindsets affect the desire for learning versus looking smart, how students view effort, and whether they're resilient and productive in the face of setbacks. All things that are essential for talent development. Now we're asking, how are these mindsets transmitted? And some of our most interesting work along these lines looks at how the praise adults give to children teaches them a mindset. We had a study come out a couple weeks ago showing that mothers' praise to their babies, 1 to 3 years of age, predicted the child's mindset and desire for challenge 5 years later. So it can start early. It's malleable. After all, we're talking about malleable minds. But the power of the praise to shape mindsets can start really early. Let's look at how this happens. By the way, the self-esteem movement really messed with parents and teachers' minds by telling them, almost making it intuitive, that they should praise children lavishly and globally, tell them how brilliant they are at every opportunity. And the idea was this would give them confidence and motivation and help their achievement. But we have shown in at least a dozen studies, if not more, that praising intelligence harms children. It puts them into a fixed mindset and turns them off to learning. Let's see how that happens. I'm going to talk about a series of studies we did with early adolescents, fifth graders. In these studies, we brought them into a room in their school and initially gave them 10 problems from this nonverbal IQ test. And then each child received one form of praise. A third were given intelligence praise. Wow, that's a really good score. You must be smart at this. Or process praise. Sometimes we've praised strategy, sometimes effort. It could be praising persistence or focus. Here we said, wow, that's a really good score. You must have tried really hard. And the control group got, wow, that's a really good score. I won't talk a lot about them. On average, they tended to be somewhere in the middle. What happened? Across these studies, we found that yes, indeed, praising intelligence put students into a fixed mindset. It told them, I can look at your performance and read this fixed trait inside of you, and you're smart. Whereas praising the process put kids into more of a growth mindset, making these skills seem acquirable. But to me, the most amazing thing was that praising intelligence instantly turned students off to learning. We then, afterwards, gave them a choice after the praise. What do you want to work on now? And we described tasks that were well within their comfort zone, where they were sure to do well and not make mistakes, or tasks that were hard. They might get confused and make mistakes, but learn something new. Most of the children praised for intelligence wanted the easy task that would ensure success. After being praised for intelligence, they did not want to step out of that comfort zone and risk making mistakes. We like to say they didn't want to risk their newly minted gifted label. Now, it doesn't have to follow from a gifted label, but that praise for intelligence makes them overly concerned with looking smart and never looking dumb. Later on, we gave everybody a hard set of problems. And what happened then? The students praised for intelligence lost their confidence. If doing well meant they were smart, well, struggling must mean they're not smart. They stopped enjoying the problems, and even when we went back to the problems that were matched to their grade level, their performance suffered. So we actually, their intelligence shrank on this IQ test as a result of being praised for intelligence. But those who were praised for their effort, for the process they engaged in, remained confident. You know, they saw these were harder problems and they knew they had to work at them. Many of them said these were their favorites. And when we returned to the age-appropriate problems, their performance had blossomed. They had remained vigorously engaged on the hard problems, taught themselves new strategies, which then bore fruit when they went back to the easier problems. So they actually looked like they gained IQ points on this test as a function, as a result of focusing on the learning process. We also found later, when we asked kids anonymously to report their scores, that almost 40% of the kids praised for intelligence lied, and only in one direction. Now, they were anonymous. They were no one they knew was going to see this, but still, I think in a fixed mindset, struggling is a disgrace, is humiliating. They could not, I think, admit it to themselves. Now, if we create generations of gifted students, or students who have tremendous potential, who are ashamed of struggling on a task or ashamed of not getting something right away, that's not a recipe for fulfilling their potential. So what should we praise? Effort? Struggle. I tell parents to sit around the dinner table and say, who had a fabulous struggle today? Or for teachers to say, what are you going to struggle with today? What are you going to struggle with today? We are conveying a value system that struggle is a good thing. And that easy things that you don't have to struggle with, waste of time, persistence in the face of setbacks, but not just effort, using strategies, praising the choices students make, and not just as they do a project. And it's not just praise, it's talking about it with them, it's encouraging, it's appreciating the process they're engaging in. And my message is that engaging in this learning process is the key to talent development. And that when parents are trying to shield kids from struggle, or shield them from mistakes, or when parents are yelling at the teacher for putting red marks on the paper, they are putting hurdles in the way of their children developing their talent. Those parents should be begging teachers to put red marks on the paper. It's called teaching. The student who doesn't get marks on an essay should feel cheated, should go up and say, well, how can I make this better? And I think as a society, we need to convey these values of struggle, trying many strategies, choosing difficult tasks, and all in the service of learning or improving. Lately, I'm often asked, how are you different from Tiger Mom? And that last line is how I'm different from Tiger Mom. In a growth mindset, everything is in the service of the ultimate value of learning and improving. And for Tiger Mom, it's just the outcome. In a growth mindset, those grades, those outcomes, they're a byproduct of engaging happily and vigorously in a learning process. And that's another thing that parents need to learn and convey to kids. It's not about the grades, it's engaging in a process, and those grades or test scores are a byproduct of a good process. Lately, how am I doing on time? Take more time. Okay. Lately, I've fallen in love with the word yet, and we're doing research on it now. I learned of a high school in Chicago that when students didn't master a course or a part of a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought, isn't that great? because yet is a growth mindset word. It means you're on the learning trajectory. You're just not at the finish line. So if a student says, oh, I'm not good at math yet, I can't do this yet, it's like, get back on that learning curve. I tried it, but it didn't work yet. And it means that the adult has faith that the child will be good at math and is willing to accompany the child on that journey. How do we change mindsets? How do we bottle a growth mindset and give it to kids? That's something we've been working on quite a bit lately. In one study, we took kids who were making that transition to 7th grade, many of whom were showing declining grades in math already, and we divided them into 2 groups. The control group got a fantastic program of study skills. The growth mindset group, however, got growth mindset and study skills. They learned that, from this article, you can grow your intelligence. New research shows the brain can be developed like a muscle. And they learned that every time they pushed out of their comfort zone to learn something new, their brains formed new connections. And over time, they could become smarter. Look what happened. The students who just learned the study skills, that's that indistinct red line going down, they continued to show declining grades. But the kids who got the growth mindset and the study skills had the motivation to put these skills into practice, and they showed a sharp rebound in their grades. Some of the other attendees at the Malleable Minds Conference, Catherine Good and Joshua Aronson, along with their colleague Michael Inslet, also did a growth mindset intervention and showed gains for those students compared to the control group in math achievement test scores and verbal achievement test scores. But even more interesting, they found that on the math achievement test scores in the control group, you see a gender difference in math performance, with the boys outperforming the girls. On the right, the group that got the growth mindset learning, both groups benefited from it, both boys and girls, but the girls benefited even more, and that gap was substantially closed and no longer a significant difference. Across our different labs, we're finding that it's particularly important for students who are laboring under negative stereotypes to learn a growth mindset. It seems to arm them against a stereotype. So a stereotype is saying it's fixed and your group doesn't have it. And if you have a growth mindset, you can say, ha ha, I know it's a learned set of skills and I'm going to keep at it. So whether we're looking at African American students, Latino students, females in math, we're finding that a growth mindset prevents them from succumbing to stereotypes or stereotype threat. We've also developed an online interactive growth mindset program called Brainology, and I can't resist just showing a few screenshots. This is the learning brain reading a book. The students taking Brainology meet these 2 hip teens, Chris and Dahlia. They're guided by the brain orb as they take on a series of quests to understand how their brain works. And the whole idea was to make these ideas more accessible on a wider basis. They visit a brain lab where the mad brain scientist, Dr. Cerebrus, shows them how the brain works and how it develops by growing new connections when you learn. They learn a series of brain-based study strategies. They use an online brain book to look up information. They write reflections on their academic work, their struggles, their goals and plans in terms of a growth mindset in their e-journal. And at the end, they earn a Brain Master certificate. What learning a growth mindset does, and I want you to just feel this viscerally, it transforms the meaning of effort and difficulty. In a fixed mindset, effort and difficulty, which we know are the roots to learning and talent development, make students feel threatened, dumb, scared, and they just want out. But what students who have gone through growth mindset training tell us is that now they understand that effort and difficulty are what make them smarter. And that when they're sitting there struggling with something, they picture all these neurons firing and making new connections, making them not feel dumb, but making them smarter. So to summarize, a growth mindset, a belief, that is a student's belief in their malleable mind, allows them to embrace learning and growth, to just go for it in developing their talents, instead of worrying about making mistakes and someone won't think I'm so smart. It allows them to understand the role of effort in creating giftedness and talent, instead of thinking if you're gifted or talented, you shouldn't need effort. And it allows them to maintain confidence and effectiveness that is resilience in the face of challenges and setbacks. And maybe best of all, it can be taught. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Should I take live questions first?
Absolutely. I also have some questions from
great.
people who are participating online.
And you're alive. So.
And I'm live,
Yes.
exactly. So I'll do my best to represent their questions. And one question is this. The person asks, how can we avoid having the focus on the development of talent send the message that smart people don't really exist as people, but merely as natural resources to be cultivated for the benefit of other people? That is, how can we focus on individual growth without also denying the validity of human beings and their personal and cultural experiences? I'm a psychologist specializing in work with gifted individuals of all ages, and this painful message is one that I hear a lot.
Oh, I think that's a really important question. And in this short talk, I did focus on the individual. But we have a lot of work showing that students in a growth mindset care about sharing their knowledge with others. They consider themselves part of a learning community. When we ask kids, when do you feel smart? They say, I feel smart when I'm helping others to fulfill, when I'm helping other kids learn. Kids in a fixed mindset say they feel smart when other kids are struggling and they're kind of acing it. We also find that students with a growth mindset about personal qualities have more empathy for others, are less likely to label and stereotype others, are more likely to have compassion even for students who might have excluded them or picked on them. So I have only begun to describe the world of the growth mindset, where it's not just about developing your own talents, but it's about fostering a community of learning. We're doing research in large organizations now, and we're finding that people who perceive that the larger organization they work in values a growth mindset say that people go out of their way for each other, they trust the organization, they'll go the extra mile for each other. But those who perceive that they're working in an organization that's about who's the genius, say people keep secrets from each other, they steal information from each other, they're in competition, and that the company does not support teamwork. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of what, because you can have a growth mindset about all kinds of personal qualities, not just intelligence. And it leads you to care not just about your test score getting into the one right school, but fostering the learning of others. I think that is so important, and it's a value that should be promoted vigorously. Rena?
How is it that...
Oh, wait. You have to wait for the mic.
Thank you. How is it that the academic environment is so much more inclined to view effort as aversive as opposed to, the performance areas? What is...
Yeah, it's really interesting. I ask myself that question a lot, and I bring it up in classes. Why do we as a society think that effortless achievement is so admirable, as opposed to working hard for years for something you value and attaining it? And when I have my students look into their great heroes, they're shocked at how those heroes struggled, failed, picked themselves up, were told they had no talent. They think they just skyrocketed to the top through natural talent. I think both messages are available in our culture. And I think what I'm talking about is changing our value system to value the struggle. And, we're so cheating those gifted students, or the students who are advanced at any given moment, by saying, oh, you didn't have to work hard, you're so good at this. You're harming their future achievement. Instead, you should be saying, oh, I'm sorry I wasted your time. Here's something hard. This is going to be more interesting for you, more fun.
It just seems as if it's more pervasive in school than it is. I mean, people see sportsmen and women practicing. They see musicians practicing.
They do.
But they don't.
You'd be
There's too much dissociation in school, and I'm just curious why.
I think another, but people see the practice in sports and music, but they focus often on talent, taking someone there. But I think parents and teachers have become so concerned that kids not struggle, that they really are giving easy things, they're giving lavish feedback. And I think that sends the message that working hard or struggling means something's wrong with you. I don't think they mean to send that message, but they're so protective of kids. Never should they have a moment of discomfort. And they're not preparing them for life. That's why we're seeing so many kids fall apart when they become independent, go to college. They just can't function because they haven't learned the values and habits that will help them function.
Thank you. I was just wondering too, how is your work, and maybe our translational people will help us understand too, because what you talk about is so important and so valuable, but schools, how about kids' perceptions of themselves when they're put in categories because of a test that they took at the beginning of the year? And I think that's seems to be a practice in lots of schools throughout, or whether it's a gifted and talented program or a high achieving math class, they'll say, oh, those are the smart kids.
Yes. So, it's a very difficult issue because everyone needs to be challenged. And so kids who are advanced need to be in an environment where they're getting hard work and they're being taught to persevere. At the same time, the boundaries need to be more permeable. So a very exciting direction in the study of giftedness and talent is the idea that talent is malleable. It can emerge at any time. And we should not be putting kids in rigid categories that say, you took a test in second grade, you'll always be gifted. You took the same test, you'll never be gifted. That should never be the case. We also know from some of our research that kids with a fixed mindset think that a standardized test measures how smart they are and how smart they'll be when they grow up. Whereas those with a growth mindset recognize that it's a snapshot at one moment in time, and nothing can tell you what your potential to achieve in the future is. So these are messages that we've got to get to students, but we also have to make those boundaries more permeable. I learned not long ago that in some top-achieving math countries, they don't put kids in different classes for math. They're all learning the same concepts at the same time, and those who are advanced go more deeply. They find several ways to solve a problem, or they help the other kids learn. So that if one of the kids who was struggling breaks through, they're right there with the others. So I think it's really important for us to find a way in our country that if someone blossoms, they're not irreparably behind a group that they rightly should be with.
Another question from a participant online asks, given that we have an assembly line system of education, how can we change that system to allow all students to actually engage in growth activities on an ongoing basis? I don't think the answer is an hour and a half of fun and games during a pull-out session once every other week until the budget is cut. How can we get the factory system? How can we get the factory system where everyone more or less does the same thing all the time to allow all kids to be putting forth real effort toward their own personal growth?
Yes. That's not a question I can answer within the scope of either this session or my expertise. But what we find is that when teachers adopt a growth mindset, and when you see or read about exceptional, extraordinary teachers who have a growth mindset, they are vitally interested in how every child learns, vitally interested in understanding everyone's learning process. And they find a way to trigger growth, interest, hard work in virtually every student. I also think that we have to become more skilled at using online learning as a supplement in the classroom. There are wonderful programs now that can be brought into classrooms. Very interactive, very interesting to kids, that can go beyond perhaps what even the teacher understands, can teach or communicate at that point, but the student's ready for it. So some combination of having teachers love understanding how a child learns and trying to figure out how each child learns, and supplementation with these exciting online learning programs that tailor themselves to the child and can take the child beyond what he or she is learning in the classroom. Okay, I'm getting the following cue to introduce my much admired and illustrious colleague across the bay, Frank Worrell, who is a distinguished professor at the University of California at Berkeley. Frank.
Thank you, Carol. Hi, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Please excuse my voice for those of you who know me. I'm fighting a cold, have been for the last couple weeks, and so my voice is not what it usually is. I should also apologize. I think Carol has said everything I want to say and much more eloquently, but I'll try to add a little bit. And I come at this from a place where I run a doctoral program at UC Berkeley, and so we get in a lot of students who are very, very bright, gifted if you want to use that term. And I found it necessary to let those students know that they're going to struggle, and that struggling is normative, because many of them come to this PhD program assuming that, you know, the hard work was getting in, and that they're not going to necessarily, that they're going to coast to get the PhD. In my class on Monday night, I was pointing out again, and I do it regularly, that the process of writing the paper, of trying to wrestle those ideas into something that makes sense, is the important part of the education that they're getting. It's not the paper at the end of it. It's the process. It's that struggle. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So I think Dr. Dweck's work has been really, I saw, instrumental in the kinds of, in my thinking, because even though I didn't have that framework in terms of mindsets, using that framework, I actually had parents who really had that framework. They had not gone to college, but actually was something that was in my household. And so it's not been studied as much in gifted and talented students. It's been studying in underachieving students. And I think in large part because our assumption is that if you are identified gifted and talented, you already have the appropriate mindsets. So as we move forward, I want to talk about this. So ability, setting, challenge, and commitment. All of these are things that we think about when we think of giftedness, but we don't necessarily use them when we are identifying students as gifted. Ability, of course, I have the asterisk there because that is the thing that we measure. We do this snapshot, right? Where the Wechsler, the Stanford Binet, the Ravens, we do this snapshot. And I certainly, as a psychologist, recognize the importance of individual differences and that there are people who have different levels of ability in different domains. But from the gifted point of view, it is necessary but not sufficient. And I'll draw a contrast, as Rena was talking about earlier, her question about sports, that I actually look at sports and so forth. And one thing that I should, let me clarify, I forgot. Jason Atwood is one of my doctoral students who's finishing off his work, and he is, a lot of the work in this presentation is from him. So I have him listed as a co-author here. He does much more work here than I do. So, but when we think of these things, when Joe Renzulli's original definition of giftedness being creativity, superior but not above average intelligence, not necessarily superior, and task commitment, I think was a seminal definition for our field that we ignored. In 1986, the First Conceptions of Giftedness book by Sternberg and Davidson, Hainsley, Reynolds, and Nash had a definition that was similar, and that's the one that's on the screen here, and I think relates to some of the things that Dr. Dweck has been saying. So we have ability, but the setting for that ability to be developed, the appropriate teaching, and what appropriate teachers, coaches do is the appropriate level of challenge. Too many students arrive into college having never had to work hard, undergraduates. Too many of them arrive into graduate school never having to work hard. And this is, in fact, where the message, that they get the message. So sometimes even if they started with a growth mindset, they don't end up with it because they've never been appropriately challenged. And if they were challenged, then they'd recognize the need for commitment, right? And commitment there is, in essence, a mindset. That's what it's all about. And so, in fact, mindsets may be a better word to use there. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been going on at Berkeley. And so one of the things is we need to do this work with appropriate samples. Much of the work has been going on not in with students who are not identified or classified as gifted and talented. And I'm going to share some research that we have done over the last few years, much of it yet unpublished. Finding time to write it up has been a little bit challenging. I am spending too much time in D.C. at ABA headquarters, as I'm doing right now. And sort of talking about what I can call indirect test of mindsets. Looking at other kinds of constructs, motivation, because